Alright, so this is my first video in my Excel for Data Marketers series. Um, Data marketers is a term I've been thinking about a lot lately. And if you're working digital marketing, whether you're an SEO or a paid search strategist or email or display or social, any sort of digital channel, um, you know, typically you start off in some sort of creative aspect of it. So typically you'll start with just coming up with ideas and then putting them out there. But I think as you progress in your career, what you'll find is that there's so much data out there, and you can actually make more informed decisions with the data that you with the data that you have. And so I like the term data marketer to be able to take data and make strategic decisions about how you want to proceed with your marketing. But you need some tools to be able to manipulate that data. So the tools that I've worked with the most have been Excel and a little bit of SQL as well. But to me, those are like the two big tools in the tool set of a data marketer. For me, there's a distinct period of before VLOOKUP BV and after VLOOKUP AV. Before VLOOKUP, I worked hard, did some really good work. But after I really understood how to use VLOOKUP, everything changed. My entire career could change. The trajectory of my career changed because I was able to now answer different questions, right? So before VLOOKUP, I can answer questions for people within my team, maybe other SEOs on my team, or other like content writers or other specialists on my team. But after VLOOKUP, now the people that I can answer questions for sort of scaled up, right? Now I can answer questions for directors and executives, right? And now that gave me a level of visibility in my career that I didn't have before. So yeah, there's definitely a distinction between before I understood VLOOKUP and after I understood VLOOKUP in my career. And I actually remember the day or the day that I actually learned VLOOKUP. It was actually me and another SEO that I worked with. We had some report that we had to build, and what we realized was we had to do a VLOOKUP in order to really get the data that we needed to present the information that we needed to present. And so we sort of just looked at each other like, let's figure out this VLOOKUP thing, right? Let's figure it out once and for all. We knew it had to be in our tool belt, and we probably used it a couple of times, but we was like, let's take this as an opportunity to really learn it and figure it out. And so we took probably a couple of days to like really do a bunch of VLOOKUPs and do a bunch of practice. We ended up with a bunch of errors or the data was off or something like that. We had to go back and figure out what was going on, and we figured it out and like, oh yeah, we got it. And it took us about a couple of days to sort of go back and forth with each other. But once we figured it out, we got it, and for sure, everything changed after that. Once we were able to do that and take data and really manipulate it the way we wanted to manipulate it, everything in our careers changed. I think I could say for him and for myself as well. I have a table here of to do an example. I have a table here of salespeople. So it has a number of deals each salesperson has made, and then the total amount of sales each salesperson has made. And if I was a sales executive, typically what I would need to do is create some sort of report of each salesperson and their sales, right? And so, for example, if I needed to get Mary's sales, right, I need to be able to look up Mary in this table and find her sales number, 90,000. And you can see here, this is the formula that I have in this cell to generate that. So let's go over that formula in a bit more detail. There's four parameters to a VLOOKUP formula. The first parameter is what you want to look up. So what value you're going to look up. And so in this case, we want to look up the word or the name Mary inside this table. So VLOOKUP, the first parameter is going to be F11, which is Mary. The second parameter is where you're going to look for Mary, meaning what range of data are you going to look in. So this table here, including the header and all the data within it, this is the range that I want to look up Mary. So for that second parameter, I have it as B9 to D13. So B9 to D13. The third parameter is what column of data do you want to return? So we want to return sales. There's three columns in this table. So I just count from left to right, one, two, three. And so column number three is what I want to actually return to give me that $90,000 number. And then last parameter is, do you want the when Excel is looking up Mary in this table, do they want to look up the exact word Mary or some sort of fuzzy or approximate match of Mary? Maybe we had another employee in here called Marilyn or something like that. Do we want to be able to make that a match as well for Mary? I've never used fuzzy match. Or approximate match or whatever it's called. Honestly, I don't even know 100% how it works. It's kind of fuzzy, right? That makes sense. So I always choose false for this. I've in the thousands of VLOOKUP formulas that I've done in my lifetime, I've never set this to true. So I always just set this to false. If I need to do some sort of partial match, I'll use a different formula for that. That's a little bit more exacting. But that's the formula structure for VLOOKUP. So parameter one, what do you want to look up? Right, we have F11 for Mary. I could actually just say instead of F11, I could just look up her name, Mary. But in this scenario, I want to make it sort of dynamic, right? If I had, three other employees in here, I want to make this dynamic and say, look up this cell, look up this cell, look up cell, instead of having to sort of hard code each person's name inside the formula. So first parameter is going to be what you want to look up. Next parameter is where you want to look, right? What cell, what data set do you want to look up? Third parameter is what column do you want to return? So if we wanted to return deals, for example, instead of sales, we can make this a 2 instead of a 3, but sales in this scenario is 3, so we're returning column 3. And then, like I said, that last parameter is always going to be, it's a true or false statement. True meaning approximate match, false meaning exact match. It's always going to be false. I can't think of a scenario where you would use true for that. So that's the basic setup for VLOOKUP. So I don't know if you kind of see, but on my screen, but in my formula, that's the formula that I have. So, like I said, I use VLOOKUPs quite a bit. I use VLOOKUPs to um, a build reports like this where I need to pull a specific data point out of a data set, right? So I do that a lot. I think the biggest reason I'll use VLOOKUPs is the ability to be able to combine data sets. That for me is a big use case for me. So for example, being able to combine Google Analytics data and Google Search Console data. Now there is a way to do that in Google Analytics, but let's just say for example, like we didn't have that connection set up inside of Google Analytics. So I have two data sources. I have Google Analytics and I have Google Search Console. Both their data is going to be related to each other. I can make that match and say a landing page is going to have sessions, bounce rate, stuff like that, and then it's also going to have an average position, clicks, impressions. I can make that distinction in my brain, and I need something physically to put that together. VLOOKUPs allows me to do that. So here's an example of what that could look like. So this is again just data from my wife's hair salon website. So I have landing pages here, and then this first sort of gray set of data is data from Google Analytics. So from Google Analytics, I can get sessions, users, bounce rate, average session duration, things like that. And then over here, I use VLOOKUPs to merge in Google Search Console data. So from Google Search Console, I get clicks, impressions, click-through rate, average position. And you could think about now the questions that I can answer with both, with that ability to be able to merge both data sets together. So, for example, on the home page, I can say, yeah, last week sessions were 131. We got 131 sessions last week. And to sort of take a step back and see how those sessions came to be, I can say 88 of those clicks came from Google. That came from 2,319 impressions to my listing in Google, right? With the click-through rate of 3.79% and an average position of 11. So if I was able to see that this session number went up or went down week over week, I can also potentially look and say, did average position go up or down week over week, right? Was that the cause of it? Like, what actually drove this 131 sessions, or most likely it would be 119 users, right, to it? And this gives me a little bit more data to be able to do that. I could also, if I wanted to, pull in the top ranking keyword, right, that drove sessions, right. I can pull in just a bunch of data that I need from Search Console, because I can make this merge together. So I'm going to go through and actually try to build this table on the fly for you, and see if we can go through some pitfalls and things like that. So if we're doing a VLOOKUP to pull in clicks, so I have two data sources. I have, this is the original sort of Google Analytics data source, and I want to pull in data from Google Analytics. So I'm going to actually start here with this practice. So this data, this is Google Search Console data. So yeah, this is at this tab, data, Google Search Console practice. Cool. So we're going to start with an equal sign to signify that it's a formula. So we're going to go VLOOKUP, excuse me, open parentheses, and then we're going to go off the formula that we have. So first parameter is the lookup value. So I'm going to look up the home page, comma. I'm going to say which range I'm going to look up in. Again, this is the only data set that we have in this tab. So I'm just going to say, I'm just going to select all the columns. So I'm going to select columns A through E as my data set. I don't have to do absolute values because I'm just selecting the columns. So there's no need to do that. You can do it, but when you're just selecting columns, it's not necessary. So comma, the third parameter I need is the column number that I want to return. So first column of data is column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I need clicks. So it's going to be column 2. And then if you remember, that last parameter is that fuzzy or exact match. Fuzzy being true, exact being false. It's always going to be false. So I'm just going to put false. And that's my formula. So I'll close off that parentheses, hit enter. Oh, and it gave me an error. Interesting. So this is sort of the first error that we want to work through. This error, you won't actually get this information in Excel, but Google Sheets does a really pretty good job of trying to provide you some error information as to what caused the error. So for this one, it'll say did not find slash in VLOOKUP evaluation. So the first thing is we looked up the home page, right, with this slash, but if you go to our data, it actually has the full URL in here, not just everything after the home page. So it couldn't find slash. And even if we did the fuzzy version where it's like set the last parameter to true, again, that's not necessarily a partial match, right? It's just hey, this is what I found that sort of looks like what you wanted to look up, right? So in this scenario, what I'll actually just do is I'll actually just replace all the values in my page column and just take out the domain. So I'll do Control H. You can go to Edit and then Find and Replace. And I'll just type in the find as the home page. So HTTP www.cherrybombsalon.com. And then I'll replace it with nothing, right? So that way it gets rid of it. And I'll just replace all. So now we have the sort of how it was set up before, where we have slash about us. So now if we go back to our practice tab, we now have 88 clicks, which works out perfect. And then from here, so now that we have this set up, because we have the columns in our range, we're using the entire column and things like that, we should be able to actually click on this square and drag down, and now it pulls in clicks for everywhere else. So you can see now, first parameter is A5 in this cell, which corresponds to the home page. And then when I, copy and paste down, A6, now becomes a number. A7 is now the number, right? A8. And again, these are just cell references. I could say, instead of A5 as my first parameter, I could say slash, and it'll give me the same thing. This is just, a way for us to do it dynamically. If I wanted to change this to whatever, right, like I can do that and it will dynamically update. One thing I wanted to show was, so we set the second range, we set the second parameter as just the entire set of columns, right, in our data. But let's say we wanted to do, let's say we had multiple data sets in that sheet, and so we had to be a little bit specific. So for that second parameter, instead of just selecting all the columns, we can go and just select the actual data, right? So now we have A1 to E8, and that works here just fine. But to illustrate a point we made earlier, if I was to copy that down everywhere else, now we've got some errors generated. And if you notice, the first cell that we create the formula in is A1 to E8. The next cell now switches because we've copied that down. Excel sort of shifts down the ranges in your formula as well. So now we got A2 to E9, A3 to E10, right, so on and so forth. This is a common error that happens, and the solution for it is you have to set that range to an absolute value. So you have to put those dollar signs before the letters and the numbers in your range, so that way it sticks. And now, if I was to copy that down, now it goes to where it needs to be. So I just wanted to point that out, that if you're using a specific range instead of just using all the columns in your data set, that you have to be mindful of that you'd want to use absolute values, so that way that range sticks as you copy and paste down your formula. Awesome. So then from there, I can do the same thing for impressions and click-through rate. So EV lookup equals VLOOKUP. I'm still going to look up the landing page. I'm going to go back to using all the columns. Impressions is now column 3. That's at column 3. False is going to be that last parameter. That gives me impressions. I can drag that down. I can do the same for click-through rate. So equals VLOOKUP. Click on my value. Select the range. Select the column number. So 1, 2, 3, 4 for click-through rate. And false. A little trick here. So I was dragging down on those first 2 columns. You can also double click on this square. If you have continuous data to the left of the cell that you're in, so this one has no breaks in between, you can double click on this square, and it pulls it all down for you. So if you have like a huge data set where you don't want to drag all the way down, you can just do that. And then the last column, average position, so equals VLOOKUP. Select the cell, select the range, enter my column. So position is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then false. I can double click on that, and that pulls it all down. Awesome. So I've recreated this table with the VLOOKUPs needed. So you can see how powerful this can be, right? I've got 2 data sources I've now been able to merge together, and now the questions I can answer are going to be much more robust than what I could answer before. Before, if I was just using Google Analytics data, right, the only questions I can answer is related to Google Analytics, right? But now if someone said, hey, this page got 131 sessions last week, I also want to know, quickly, how what was the average position last week, right? I can now provide that information because I've been able to merge the 2 data sources together. Some things to keep in mind as you're doing VLOOKUP. So there's some pitfalls to be aware of. So one, when you're looking up a table within a sheet that contains multiple data sets, you want to use what's called absolute values in that where to look range. Meaning, so like in this example here, I have this sales table, but this sales table is sort of buried within a bunch of other data on this sheet. So I want to make sure that anytime I'm using the formula to look up this table, that range that I have in my formula doesn't move. And so I set up absolute values for this range, which is basically these dollar signs before each element. So I'm saying always look in column B, always look in row 9, always look in column D, always look in row 13. If I don't do that, I'll show an example here. If I don't, actually, I'll show an example on the practice once we get to viewing the example. But yeah, it's just something that you want to keep in mind, that if you're looking up data where it has multiple data sets, you want to make sure you use absolute values. We can actually see an example here. I've got some Google Analytics data that I pulled in from my wife's website, Cherry Bomb Salon. If you need a hair salon and you're in Utah, hairstylist, go check it out. But I have some data here, and it actually has 2 data sets that gets sort of pulled in from Google Analytics. So I'm looking at landing page information, and then I'm looking at information by day. And if I was to say VLOOKUP this whole sheet, right? I'm going to also VLOOKUP this stuff, and it's probably going to throw things off, right? So in this scenario, if I'm going to look up, for example, just the landing page data, I need to be hyper specific and say only look up this range. Don't change no matter where the formula is or what gets moved around. This is different from Google Search Console. So the Google Search Console, when you export that data, all you get is just that data. So this sheet only has landing page data from Google Search Console. So I could say in my VLOOKUP, hey, just look up this whole everything in column A to column E, and not have to worry about making it absolute because there's no other data source in here. So Google Analytics data that I have in here has two data sources, so I need to be specific about where that data needs to go and use absolute ranges. Here I don't necessarily have to because this is the only data source in the sheet. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The second thing to keep in mind, so I sort of just alluded to this, but when you're looking up a table within a sheet that contains a single data set, you can look up the entire column in that where to look range. So I can have in here instead of B9 to D13, if this was the only data in the sheet, I could potentially just say B to D, right? Instead of the actual cell values that I need. And that way, I don't have to worry about absolute values. I don't have to worry about formulas messing up if I copy and paste. I'll show you what that looks like here in a second. I can just look up those the entire columns. I mentioned this earlier. You're gonna always use an exact match to look up. I put in here 99% of the time, but that's just because there may be like one weird time where you need a fuzzy match. But I've never used it. You'll most likely 100% of the time use exact match and setting that fourth parameter to false. And then the first column in your range, this is one last tip, the first column in your VLOOKUP has to be the lookup column. So for example, if I want to look up Mary in this table, Mary, this name column can't be the second column, and then my formula is still looking at B9 to 13. The first column in my lookup has to be what I'm actually looking up. This first parameter has to be within the first column of my lookup table. So something else to keep in mind if you there's other formulas to allow you to sort of go horizontally and look in between data sets to find what you need. Index match is the one that comes to mind. There's also now they just added in a recent update to Excel XLOOKUP. XLOOKUP is sort of a cross or a combination of VLOOKUP and a horizontal lookup or HLOOKUP or an index match formula. So you can use an XLOOKUP in Excel. It's not in Google Sheets, but you can use an XLOOKUP in Excel or index match if you wanted to not have to rely on that first column being that lookup column. But if you're doing a VLOOKUP, that first column has to be the lookup column or has a lookup value. So to finish off with VLOOKUP, there's a couple of just tips I wanted to add in. So the first thing is sometimes you'll have a situation where you're looking up something in another data source and that lookup doesn't exist. That value doesn't exist in that first column, but it's a valid value, right? So for example, I sort of modified the sales example from up here. So I've got the same sales data, right? John, Tom, Jenny, Mary, right? All their sales information. But let's say we hired as a sales executive, we hired two new employees this month, and now included in the report I build is now Joe and Jim, right? So I'm still building the same report where I'm showing Mary's data. And I'm maybe showing other people's data, but now I'm showing Joe and Jim. But Joe and Jim hadn't exist; they haven't done any sales because they just got hired. When you do a lookup in that table, right, it's going to show as zero, but I still need a report on Joe and Jim. And so the way that we can sort of account for errors, if they're just valid, if they're valid values, but they just aren't listed in the data set, is we can add an if error statement before the VLOOKUP, so we can sort of nest a formula inside a formula. We're nesting VLOOKUP inside an if error formula to say if there is an error that occurs, like I trust my data, right? The error is just that there was no value in here. If an error occurs, I want you to do something else. I want you to set this cell to something else. So the formula for that is if error. So you would add before your VLOOKUP if error, and an if error formula essentially has two parameters. The first parameter is your actual formula, right? So in our case, it's just a VLOOKUP formula. And then the second parameter is what happens if that formula generates an error. So in this scenario, I've appended if error to the formula, and then I say if there is an error, just make it zero, right? Because they wouldn't have had any sales because they're just new employees. So to prevent your, if this was 10,000 rows of data, and a good chunk of them was these errors, it kind of looks funky in your report and your data set. And so use if error to designate what happens if the lookup value doesn't exist in your lookup row in your lookup column. Um, so yeah, for that I just set these at zero, and now in the report, it'll just say zero, and then over here I can make a comment, in another cell or something like that in the report and just say like new employee or something like that, right? Just to designate why there were zero sales. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I'll show you that here in real time with the practice. So let's say, for example, we had another page that we just added to our website called slash testimonials, right? I just built the testimonials page. So it doesn't have a whole lot of data with it. Maybe there's one here, or maybe there was like one session, one user, 100% bounce rate because it was just a brand new page, and average session duration of 10 seconds because it was just, I just built it, right? Um, get some formatting going here. So now when I do that VLOOKUP evaluation, right, now I'm going to get errors all the way down. But this testimonials page. This is a valid page. It's new. There's no data on it yet, right? Google Search Console hadn't seen any data on it. So I could, instead of presenting this in my report and having people say, "Hey, what's up with these errors that I'm in here?" I could add that if error statement before. So I can say, so I can make the screen a little bit bigger. So I can say if error, right? I still have my evaluation. So if error open parentheses, right? First parameter is what is my formula, right? So that's that. And then I just add a second parameter. What's going to happen if I create an error? And I just set that to zero. Now if I copy that all the way down, now that creates that to be zero instead of an error. And then I can do that for the rest as well. So we'll say if error, set that to zero. I'll copy that down. If error here, and then if it is an error, set that to zero. That broke some of my formatting, changed it from a number to a percentage, so I'm just going to go back to format number, change it to percent, and then same thing here. If error, and then add a zero. So now I have clean data, right? Now I can say, hey, it's just a new page, but having no information here is fine. Like we'll just mark that as zero. So that's the one tip I want to have, and then another sort of advanced tip. So what happens sometimes is you'll get a data set. So in this case, for example, like Google Search Console or Google Analytics, or from some API or some internal data set, right, that you have, maybe your internal CRM. And sometimes what happens is the columns will change for whatever reason, right? Like you do an export from, for example, from your internal CRM, and for some reason, clicks, in this example, clicks may move to column 3 instead of column 2, right? And then impressions becomes column 2 instead of column 3. Well, in our formulas, we've been using those column numbers to do that. So we've been saying, oh, I did the wrong one. Excuse me. This one here. Yep. So yeah. So in our example, we've been using column numbers to specify where clicks, impressions, click-through rate, and average position are. But if my next export, if I try to rebuild this report again, and my next export of Google Search Console has those two flipped, now my data's off. Right now it's showing 2,000 clicks and 88 impressions. Right. That doesn't make sense at all. And so sometimes if that happens, what you'll want to do is switch from um, using the column number as a designator of where data is, to actually saying, I want you to look for the heading clicks, right? And set that as the column, right? So instead of saying 2 as that third parameter, we would say essentially look for clicks, and wherever clicks is, that's the data that I want to pull. So the way that you do that is with adding to your VLOOKUP this match statement. If we were to, well, we'll go through it first, and then I'll talk a little bit more about it. So in this example, we have Mary, we're looking up her sales, right? And typically we would say in that third parameter, look for column 3, right? But this time we're going to say, hey, look for the word sales in my heading, and then find that information, right? Use that as your column. So this match formula as the third parameter is how you do that. So we do the structure for it is match, open parentheses, and then the first thing is what word in your heading are you looking for? Which heading are you looking for? So we're saying in quotes sales, right? So text item. And then there's three parameters. This so first one is the heading. The second parameter is what row, where is the heading data, right? What row has the heading data? So for us, it's C. In this table, it's C7, or excuse me, B73, and that's actually we're on one. So let's update that here. So it's actually B. Keep doing VB 73 to D 73. Sorry about that. So yeah, so it's going to be this sort of line here. B73 to D73 has our data. You can see in the actual formula I did that, but for whatever reason I had it wrong up here. So yeah, so parameter one, what is the heading? Parameter two, where is the heading located? What is that first row, right? So B73 to D73. And then the last parameter is, again, an exact or partial match type of scenario. Zero is exact. I think one is partial. Don't quote me on that. Let me actually look that up and see what that last parameter is. Yeah. Yep. So yeah, zero is the exact match, and then one, and I guess negative 1, or blank is an approximate match. Again, I've never used approximate, so I was just sticking to zero as exact match, and then you would finish off your VLOOKUP formula with the false for the exact match for the VLOOKUP. So again, three parameters in your match statement. So first parameter is the heading that you want to look up. So sales in quotes. The second parameter is the range of your headings, not the range of the entire table, right? You've already done that here in your VLOOKUP in that second parameter. But the range of your heading, right? So in this case, it's B73 to D73. And then the last value is exact or approximate match. You would just always do exact and set it to 0 for exact. And then finish off your VLOOKUP formula. So now that allows me to look up sales, right? Look up that column. And if I was to switch this from column 2 to column, or excuse me, column 3 to column 2, like I would still get this $90,000 number. So again, let's look at this in practice. So we use this example tab here. So again, we switch the example data to have impressions be the first one, or excuse me, impressions be column 2, clicks be column 3, versus originally clicks was column 2, impressions was column 3. So that threw our data off. So to put it back, or to at least look up the headings instead of the column numbers, make this a little bit bigger here. I'm going to change this third parameter. So this third parameter right now is just the number 2 for the column. I'm going to embed I'm going to embed a match statement inside of it, or nest a match statement inside of it. So I'm going to match colon. I'm going to look for, so this is my clicks column. So I'm going to look for the word clicks. I'm going to say where clicks are located in my data set. So it's going to be this data here. So A1 to E1. I'm going to make that an absolute value because that's not going to change likely. The other option as well, instead of just dragging and selecting the exact data, like for example, let's say Google Search Console added in sessions to their data, and then move clicks all the way to the end. If you just use this absolute range, you may not catch it. So what I actually like to do, if this is only one data set in my sheet, then I'll actually just select the whole column. When you do that, now it changes from like A1 to E1 to just one of one, right? Column, or excuse me, row one of runs. And select the entire row, excuse me. So selecting row one of one. And I can make that, again, an absolute value so it doesn't jump to 2 to 3 when I copy it down. But that is typically what I'll do, is I'll just select the entire row. And then the last parameter of match is going to be true or false, or excuse me, exact match or approximate match. 0 for exact match, so I'll set that to 0. And then I'll close off that formula, right? I've now closed off the match formula. And then now I should be good to go. So if I select that and press enter, now my clicks turn to 88. And then because I've got all the absolute values all set up properly, I should be able to set that, copy paste that down. And now I have my clicks. And then I'll do the same thing for impressions. So instead of 3 as my numbers, excuse me, make it a little bit bigger here. Instead of 3 as my number, I'll set a match statement. So match, I'm looking for the word impressions. I'm saying my data is here. Make sure that's an absolute. And now add that third parameter of 0, close off that nested formula, and now it should grab impressions, right? So now no matter where I move, impressions or clicks, the data is going to be accurate at that point. Something else to keep in mind, like I said, if you have issues where like data moves around on your like export or something like that, use the match statement to look for the specific heading that you want to look up. So that's a critical one. You can actually see. I'll show you sort of what this actually evaluates out to. If I was to take this match formula and just like separate it out and just do it on its own, so I'm going to do equal match impressions. It gives me a value of 2. So it's actually the same as saying VLOOKUP A5, comma, my range, comma 2, right? This evaluates out to 2, right? And then false, right? That's really what this is doing, is it's saying what column number is this impressions column, right? And then it essentially adds the number 2 to my formula for me. So it's like a dynamic way of building this formula. Awesome. That is it with VLOOKUP. So like I said, it's a pretty powerful formula. Like I said, there's other variations of it that a lot of people use. Index match is the sort of most popular one. XLOOKUP is the newest one that's come out in Excel. I know a lot of people that started off with index match and only do index matches, right? I started off with VLOOKUP, so I typically only do VLOOKUPs unless I really need to use an index match. But I think it's a pretty powerful formula to start off with, and can really take your data analysis to the next level if you can get this down. I use it not just for sort of analytic data, reporting data. If I'm doing a crawl on a website and I'm collecting a ton of data on like a 10,000 page website, I don't want to have to manipulate that data all manually to try to figure out what's going on from a technical perspective on a website. I have the data that I need. I have all the technical details that I need from that crawl. I can use VLOOKUPs to sort of manipulate it and see how the site's organized and structured, without having to like manually sort through 10,000 rows, or if it's a huge website, 50,000 rows of page information, just to get the information I need from an SEO perspective. So if you have any questions about this, feel free to connect with me, DwayneHogan.com. There's a link to contact me on there. LinkedIn, Twitter. Love to answer your questions. But thanks for watching.